question that came up earlier was to Chiara, but maybe it's also interesting to pose it here. Was the question for the main benefits of using Blender software for Chiara's research? Is it how does it fit into your for your work?
Yes. So yeah. So Blender, it's an open source software. It's free and open source. So I think. And yeah, and I mean, also as far as technical level, it's now, especially with the new release, it's really, you don't miss any other features of commercial software for that matter. So I can definitely recommend it as a very good tool to use that. There are other, so of course it depends always on what you want to do, because Blender is mainly a hand modeling software. So if you want to create 3D models from existing objects, like I show, for example, the tables or the portraits of the crafts parents, these are taken from objects that exist, of which I took pictures of, and then I modeled them with another approach, an image-based modeling approach. And then you need another type of software, and that's why I also reference to Mushroom, which is another open source software. There are other commercials, of course, softwares available. So, so it really depends always on what you want to do with it.
And how does it link in with Hugo's virtual environment?
You mean for the export?
It's the software.
Ah, yeah, yeah. So I'm exporting. So these are two different pipelines. So I'm creating the softwares in Blender and then export them into a certain format, and then Hugo is taking these exported formats and then use them in his own the pipeline that he's developing. So we can further talk about that.
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, so an advantage of Blender in this case is that it's very easy to collaborate also, because sometimes I have to do some changes to the 3D models for testing. So in this pipeline, it's very easy to both use the same tool without having to buy them. Mm-hmm. And also to export things in different ways to test out different for instance how well it performs with certain export and all those things. So it's very useful to have these open tools for this, and also to later other people can reproduce this as well.
Yeah, I want to go back to a question that Aileen posed about the contemporary descendants of the De Graaf family, and whether they are aware of this research. I think it's a very interesting question, because it shows that the broader idea that is explored, I think, both in the Freedom of the Streets project and in the Virtual Interiors project, that you create this virtual version of the past to engage with it in a new way, which is the philosophy of the time machine concept that we are also working on in both projects. This idea that you create a sort of virtual version of the world that runs parallel, and that you can also travel through time. And I spoke to someone who is a descendant of this family somewhere in the past, and he is actually tracing the steps of his family. So really also including basically doing this kind of work, but then on paper and just brick and mortar. So I think there's clearly a lot of potential here to make this happen. At the same time, I think both projects show that how much work it is to actually unearth all these details. So the Freedom of the Streets, to really go into the sources and identify the people, places, events it's a lot of handwork. So, and that's what we, in the end, we need bigger data on Amsterdam's past and its inhabitants and what they owned and where they lived and where they moved. And then you can start drawing these personal histories through that whole data collection. There are other questions, I think.
Yes, sir. I see at least 3 questions. Charles has a question about the use of and weight of parameters. Jonathan about textures, and Lex Bosman a question to Xuan. So maybe in that order. Maybe Charles, you would like to pose your question yourself.
You briefly mentioned Gam's parameters, and I was wondering, since we were talking about how to use the 3D models in historical research, how you defined your parameters and whether they have a specific weight. Is one parameter more important than another one as part of your historical questions and to answer them?
I would not bring one parameter to forward, but what I would do at the end, in the end product, is to highlight which reconstructions or which representation forms are the most reliable ones and directly coming from the archival sources, or which are based on, for example, comparative studies. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So provenance is a very important criterion.
Yeah, it is very,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, clear. Thank you.
Okay, Jonathan, your question about textures. Perhaps you can take the floor. Jonathan, are you there? There's so many faces. So maybe we, until he shows up, we'll go to Lex Bosman with his question for Xuan.
Yes, I'm interested in the way you come up with these house types. Are you using, let's say, a given set of types of houses, or do you create your own models from the written or other sources, visual sources yourself?
So the main source of inspiration was Fabry van Soestenburg's article in 2016 that we used the 16th century models, and also in the same simplified manner of reducing the different small minorities and aggregate into the prototype of the more generalized types of housing. So that was my main sources. And also I'm trying to improve building on top of that with the 17th century inventories, and also refer to what Clay Lescher's book in Winkellandschap. You also refer to that. You expose my research into more inventories, not only limited to the artists and art dealers, but also trying to see if these patterns or the typologies are more in line with the common Amsterdam houses or not. And I think it's pretty consistent from my test using either Fabry's research and also Clay's research, as well as I'm now collecting more room names from Montia's database. That these inventories that Monti has collected only include partial room names. I'm expanding them to see how the houses were described, and from there I derive into these typologies and the reduced and necessary details, and into the simplified version that can guide categorize the functional rooms into a clear reference.
Do you also use visual sources like maybe maps, let's say starting with Cornelis and Toonzoon, of course?
Yeah, I do, and I do use both visual sources in building plans, the drawings of 17th, 18th century, and also the modern reconstruction of the sections or floor plans that published in Gebouw in Amsterdam, the Amsterdamse Gebouw. Yeah, so I sort of extend this even more abstract model into detail with more sections of the space inside the house. So
Okay,
that's my ground. Thank you.
Okay, I see that Jonathan has surfaced, so please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Okay, so the question I think is most suitable for Chiara. Very interesting presentation, by the way. I'm particularly interested in the decision to use non-authentic sort of textures for some parts of the 3D reconstruction. I'm thinking of the forehouse. So things like the lime plastered walls or the marble floor or some of the painted wood textures. However, there are then the photo captured with the photogrammetry and some of the hypothetical, like the grisailles in the panels in the wall. Why that combination, and why not capture authenticated lime wash walls, etc., for all of the textures in the room, so that at least everything is in one style?
Yeah. So thanks for your question. Yes. So the texturing is always a bit tricky in the 3D environment, because when you go from the grayscale model, it's a little bit safer. It already conveys this idea of uncertainty, unfinished and work in progress, and then you go for full photorealistic, and then of course people are starting pointing, oh, but why this, why that, which is also very interesting, because of course when you add textures, you add materials, you add layers of, I would say, almost intuitive relation with the object. So then it also adds layers of meaning to the reconstruction, maybe even unintended at first. So to your question, for example, the floors, these are actually pictures from real materials. So I took them from the Amsterdam City Hall and from other marble tiles, and then I placed them in the as textures in the environment, and also the plaster maybe gave you the idea that it's not authenticated, but it's also that's also like a real. Okay. Yes. So I think the difference is really from objects that I modeled myself from scratch, and models for which I had a visual reference, and then from which I could take, in fact, pictures of and model them with a different technique. So I see the difference more in the techniques that I used in modeling than as the textures themselves.
And I noticed there's an issue with shadows in, especially for the objects. Is that sort of a temporary thing that will be fixed, or especially the tables, the marble tables in the hall, in the forehouse, seem to have no shadow underneath them when the candlelight was sort of operative, that kind of thing?
Yeah. So there is a big light now that I wanted to let's say stress the fact that there is this entrance door, and then there is light coming from there. So this light creates a bit this maybe this lack of shadows in some places underneath the table, like you noticed. Yeah.
Thank you.
If I can add something to that about the shadows. Because in the example with the candlelight that I showed, it was actually a performance issue that my computer, my Mac, couldn't actually handle the shadows, so I had to turn them off, but they can be there. But for the screencast, I couldn't actually capture them. But that's correct, that they were not there.
I still see also a question by Paul Dijsselbergen on the books, Chiara. Paul asks, do you think that all volumes fitted in the book room, as there seem to be almost 3,000 volumes, about 700 large books? You know the answer to that question.
Yeah. So okay. This reconstruction of the library and all the research on the book catalog and the books, it was really awesome for me to do that. I should say, which is something I didn't have time to go into much into my presentation, that we know from the testament of Pieter de Graaf that he had books also in other parts of his house. He had books in the Kamerzolder, and he had books also in his comptoir. So the library, and actually he had also books in other of his properties. So he had books in the Ilpenstein Castle, a few books also in Falkenburg in another house. And so the work that I'm doing and the research that I'm doing is also to try to see whose books are actually those. And my argument is that it's actually a family collection that he inherited partially also from his father, his grandfather, his brother as well. So it shouldn't be automatic that there is this Buchenkammer, and then that we should fit all the books that, for example, we see in the book catalog into that room. And the room itself, it's quite small. It's about 6 meters per 2.80, something like this. So yeah, I mean, fitting all the books in there would be a bit challenging, I think.
And that's also, I think, a very nice example of how this 3D modeling directs you to dig further in the sources themselves to find out where the books must have been.
Exactly.
Because you can see it cannot fit. And you're publishing, you're actually finishing an article on this very interesting Buchenkammer, so that will be shared as soon as it's accepted, right?
Yeah, thanks. Yes.
Okay, I'm looking at the time. We're nearly through. I see a small comment for Juan by Irma Hermans on how painters preferred a certain type of light for their studio. Was something that came to my mind as well. That of course the location for their studios must have had some relationship with lighting. So Irma says that may have influenced their choice for the first floor and front or back room, depending on the actual situation of the house vis-a-vis the light, of course. So this is maybe something for you to take into account when looking at specific painters.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually have paid particular attention to the actual facing of the house in response to where the workshop locates. And unexpectedly, I found more counter examples than the examples who support the lighting theory, meaning that like I have, for example, Peter Lassmann, the Rembrandt's teacher, at the house had this studio in the place that facing north, which we think the south-facing homes will be more fortunate with lighting. And the same for Peter Kolde and for the other several painters that are located their workshop facing in the north-facing room instead of the south-facing room that we consider now have better lighting. So I'm not quite confident to claim that the choice of which room to use within their home have direct relation to the lighting situation at home. And if they have the other source of lighting available for the home, I'm not quite sure about that, but I have tested this already about the facing of the room and the relative location within the house.
Well, I think that's up for discussion internally again also. I thought that north-facing studios was the preference. So maybe that's something to discuss between us. Thank you very much. I'm closing the salon here. I want to thank all our speakers. Very nice job, very interesting. And I think it's very exciting to see this combination of this public space and trying to use 3D modeling to understand how specific events that the Freedom of the Streets team traces in these sources, how that must have taken place literally in public space in two big cities in the pre-modern, early modern period across the globe. I think it's very exciting to see this emerge in 3D. And also to see in the Virtual Interiors project how this all plays out in a specific theme around the consumption of culture in yeah, behind the street facade. So I hope it was a nice salon. I see very nice comments, so I thank you audience members also, and please follow us either via our CREATE website or our CREATE_UVA Twitter handle. We hope to see you at other salons, and thank you for being here, and hope to see you in real life at some point too. Thank you. Bye-bye.